on the DPF. So how did we miss one area, but how did we still meet that standard?
So in this report, we have separated out elementary and middle and high school in separate categories, but on the DPF, it brings them together. So when you bring that together and you look at our accreditation ratings, we did meet. And so that's how we determined that the indicator then reflected on the DPF, we would meet that standard.
Okay.
Or that indicator, it's not really a standard.
So this is part of the interpretation piece. When we look at it later and we're going to say, is the superintendent's interpretation reasonable? That's one of the questions we're asking. Is that a reasonable interpretation that 5 of 6 in here means we meet the indicator because the state agreed?
Exactly. If you look at our report card, the DPF, then we met.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just add, I trust you know these are really, really good growth scores. For 5 of the 6 to be above what would be expected for a student at the same achievement level to get, we're very proud of those scores.
As well we should be for a district this large. As you've explained many times before, Dr. Hatchell, how difficult it is for a large district to meet all of these categories in terms of growth, the expectation of growth. So it's commendable. It's commendable. I also wanted to ask one last question. Indicator 8, systemic success is indicated by graduation rates. By the way, I think these are fantastic numbers that we're putting up, and we were robbed.
Yes.
0.3 of a percentage point. Are you kidding me? Seriously.
You know, I could talk to you about this for a long time. but I just want to say that Jolene's predecessor and I spent an hour talking about this, and she worked very hard at the state level. You know, this originally, what was it, 98%? What was it? It was a ridiculous number. Yeah, it was unattainable because very few school districts in the state have higher graduation rate than us, and 94.7 does not exceed is really a head scratcher. You're right. We're like, okay, let's round it to 95, but they said no. So.
We were in charge of that.
Well, I did want to ask you though. This is a 4-year graduation rate, correct? So, do we have available right now? What's our completer rate? That 6-year, whatever that number is. And I apologize, my eyes just could not focus on that.
I know.
That puppy. It's just a little too small. By the time I blew it up, I couldn't really read it. And you know, if not, it's not a big deal. I don't want everyone waiting here for the answer because I know it's getting late. I know our rate's good, but I just wondered what it is. Yeah, if you can get back to me, that'd be great. If you don't mind, just email it out. That'd be lovely, because I know we've discussed this before, I just don't remember what it is.
Right.
But I also just wanted to give a shout out to District 20 again, because, I mean, those are kids who otherwise wouldn't have graduated. So, I mean, that really matters and is very significant, I think. So anyhow, thank you very much for an outstanding report. I am done. Oh, yes ma'am. Bullock.
Just a couple quick comments. Thank you for the STAR scores. That was really fascinating. At first I was going to ask you what happened to our 11th graders, and then I remembered those were the same 11th graders that got our best ACT score in history. So I don't know what happened. They didn't take the STARS seriously, maybe. I don't know. It's a bad day. But just anecdotally, I love the report, and it's great. I know you guys put a lot of work into it, and something that I love to do is visit classrooms so I can see what's really happening. And I have to say that yesterday I was at Antelope Trails and observed a class of 4th graders. They came into a library, which is now it's learning space. No, they don't read books anymore. They do stuff. But anyhow, I got to see all these things in action. They had gotten some new technology toys, and a lot of them were electronic kind of things or robotic kind of things, these little things called Cybots or robots, Ozbots, that's what they were called. And they had some little bug robot that was on this map. Anyhow, the teacher just gave them some kind of ground rules and then set them loose. go find a seat, and there were like 5 different things that they could have done, and put them in partners with no instructions, with these new toys that they had never used before. And they had to figure out what they were supposed to do. They had to communicate, they had to think it through, they had to problem solve, and it was so fun watching the different groups with all the different toys, so to speak, little robot type things, just watching how these kids performed, and they could fight or yell or scream, and they all were doing something completely different, and so it was just really fascinating. So that was one example, and then right after that I went to a kindergarten play, and just watching the kids, which was just so adorable. And then last night my son brought home a iPhone case that he designed in engineering class and printed it on a 3D printer. And so again, there's all of our learning skills all in one. And so awesome things, and you gave some examples. Awesome things are happening in our schools. We have some fabulous teachers and principals, and they're allowing our students to really learn and figure things out.
And I'll just join the happy chorus. This must be the most difficult report to put together. 1.1 is so multifaceted, and yet you're able to hone it and pull all the multitude of examples and data to present this very truly succinct and informative report. So thank you to all of you for your tremendous work in that regard. But I'm more grateful and want to thank all those who did the work that is represented by these numbers. It is so increasingly difficult for us to show growth, and yet continue to do so now 7 years in a row, and just phenomenal. And in the context of what is the very first page of the DPF cover page, where it says accredited with distinction and then asterisk low participation. So a phenomenal accomplishment, even under difficult circumstances. And so I hope you'll convey to one and all, the top to the bottom, how proud we all are of them and of you for allowing this to be such a tremendous, nurturing, growing, learning atmosphere. And I have to do a small shout out to theater. I'm so glad to see those huge numbers, because I feel like theater, drama, anything that has a performing art aspect to it is the answer to the question that we often receive, like, how do I prepare myself for the real world? How do I do an interview? Well, if you're up there performing, if you're presenting, and it's a difficult situation, and you have that skill, that's it. You're there. You know, if you can present to a room full of people, you can talk to somebody in an interview. So I feel like it's a really practical skill, even though it's considered all esoteric and everything. But I feel like it's a true gift that we were able to give to our students. So thank you all, and thank you for all the great comments and questions. If there's any,
I could say just real briefly, thank you, and you are right. This is our biggest, most time-intensive, most complex report that we give all year, probably by far.
clearly, and we appreciate it.
Great job, learning service.
Anything further? Well, then I guess we're ready for the old monitoring report. I will begin with, is the superintendent's interpretation of policy reasonable? Yes. Is there sufficient evidence to determine compliance for each section? If not, well, is there? Yes, absolutely, without question. Are all sections in compliance?
Yes.
Yes. According to the DPF. Recognition of exemplary performance. Well, we would certainly want to incorporate everything that we said. Any concerns regarding performance? Bravo. That includes item 10. there's more, darn it.
Did you give us a short version?
I was like, hey, I'm finally in charge. I'm cutting that thing.
Second page is gone.
Okay, we'll go back old school. How about, would you like to see any additional or different evidence or formatting changes in the next monitoring report cycle?
Just that request I made if it's not too time intensive. I will put that on it if it's not too time intensive.
Very good. Do you see evidence which is extraneous or no longer necessary? Nope. Are there any areas you would like to learn more about prior to presentation of the next monitoring report cycle? Nope. Finally, section 3, are there linkage needs the board should address? None noted. Do you see the need for any part of this policy to be changed? We find it to be very effective. So that does truly conclude the monitoring report for ends 1.1 knowledge and skills. Thank you all. Turning to item 11 and the monitoring report for EL 2.4 financial condition and activities. Dr. Hatchell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gregory.
Good evening again. I'm here to present the monitoring report for executive implementation 2.4 financial condition and activities. Quick reminder, the board policy states with respect to the administration of the district's financial resources, including those not under his or her direct control because of charter school law, superintendent will not cause or allow jeopardy to the long-term financial health of the district or a material deviation from the board's ends priorities. Summary of the points within the policy. The superintendent will not expend more monies than have been received in that year unless the board approves otherwise. Indebt the organization in an amount greater than can be repaid in the same year. Expend monies in excess of $100,000 from reserves without approval of the board. Permanently transfer monies from one fund to another unless approved by the board. Fail to settle payroll and vendor obligations and debt payments in a timely manner. Commit to any single non-budgeted purchase or expenditure greater than $100,000 except in clear emergencies. Number 7, put an asterisk by this one for right now. Allow splitting orders to circumvent any limit. Number 8, fail to ensure that purchases are based on precaution against conflict of interest, comparative pricing, and balance between long-term value and cost. Allow procurements of $5,000 or more to occur without comparative pricing, and procurements of $25,000 or more than $25,000 without a formal bid process. Allow reports or filings required by agencies, outside agencies, to be overdue or inaccurate. Receive, process, or disperse funds under insufficient controls. Fail to keep complete and accurate financial records by fund and accounts in accordance with recognized principles of governmental accounting. So compliance with most of these provisions is available or confirmed through either the adopted budget, the final budget, a comprehensive annual financial report, internal audits, or the external audit. Essentially, that's the data sources that let us determine compliance or not. We are reporting compliance on 11 of the 12 provisions. We have a short paragraph here to explain. During normal and regular review of records, including internal audits, 2 instances of possible splitting were discovered at 2 different schools. It was deemed that in both cases, the transactions fit our internal definition of splitting. In each case, consequences have been issued to the staff involved, including removal of access to P cards for 1 staff member. Both instances were violations of internal policy and best practice only. As such, the superintendent is being reported as non-compliant with EL 2.4.7. Further training, examples, non-examples, communication will occur once again, to prevent future instances. I would also add to this verbally that it also says in the report that the superintendent has met with the parties involved also to reinforce the concept. With that, I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Mrs. Bullock?
Mr. Gregory, did we have this splitting problem last year as well?
We did not. We had it the year before that.
Oh, okay. Okay, so there goes Dr.
Recently.
Hatchell's perfect record.
1 year perfect. Back down again.
Sorry to read.
Because for a minute, I thought you were just giving us the same report as last year, and I was thinking, did he forget to change the report?
No, both instances were not to circumvent or get extra money, both were for expediency.
Oh, because they didn't want to have.
If they have a card for $250, they have a purchase for $280, run that through twice.
If you want to know, I can add more detail to the instances if you want.
So are we really just talking about $250?
Well, the other one was a textbook purchase, again, for expediency. They did it by grade level instead of entire school.
Essentially, the two instances were one, the P card went out with an approval to spend a couple $100. It was a small key, I think it was a $250 P card. They got to the checkout lines. We heard this story before a couple years ago, and it was in excess of $250. So it was buy $250 worth, and send the other, I think it was like $40 through and pay for it a second time. That's splitting to circumvent the limit on the P card. I don't know where you put that on the spectrum of, it's for speed, but the limits are also there, not arbitrarily. The limits are there as a protection. If somebody were to steal the card, they might get $250. But if they try to run it for more than that, it'll get denied. Those protections are in place for a reason, and we just want people to follow them. It's a ongoing, learning for Tom, ongoing daily education process for the large staff, 2,800 folks.
Thank you, Mrs. Van Meter. I was
That's
looking
okay.
at Mr.
I understand. A follow-on to that, do we have any kind of an exception process? I mean, literally, if you're standing in a line, can you call in and go, look, I don't want to make another trip to the store and I don't want to violate policy, okay, but I'm here and this is what's happening. Is there an exception process? Or in the case of a textbook order, oh my gosh, okay, we goofed, we need the textbooks now. Can I call Tom, can I call somebody and get, you know what I'm saying, an authorization? Because I agree with we don't want to bend the rules all the time for just because, people didn't plan appropriately. But occasionally, if there's a moment, do we have something like that?
I would short answer is no, we don't have that in place. We have multiple options for tools for folks to use in the district, because they have a $250 card, they also have a $500 card, and they also have a $1,000 card, and they also have one higher than that that's only in the principal's name. Those are the controls in place. So the answer here is, don't take that card, take this card. Then it's, take the next level up, get a good estimate of what it's for. You leave the building with a card that has a limit to that card per transaction and per day. And you also have signed that card out saying, Mr. or Mrs. Principal or Director or Superintendent, I'm asking to take this card so that I can make a purchase for X, Y, and Z, and I'm estimating the cost to be A. So it's not only the card that's saying it has a limit, you've been approved to spend by your supervisor a certain amount. If you've completely missed that, and you thought that the $100 purchase is now $250, then we probably need to discuss that, because why is there such a discrepancy? So that's why we really want to make things as easy as possible for folks. And it seems somewhat petty. I'll use that word petty. But they're there for, we want the culture to be the right culture. And it, I don't know what else I could say. I can say that when I read this, I worded this specifically. It says, during normal and regular reviews of records, including internal audits, 2 instances of possible splitting were discovered at 2 different schools. The folks who find them don't deem them anything. They bring them to me, say, I have a question, this possibly is splitting. So ultimately it's myself. Generally I get with Marita and or Linda and we say, does this fit the definition, kind of a thing. And in these 2 cases, so there are others where we say, no, that's really not an instance of splitting. These 2 we deemed that yes, because there was a limit in place, that was not purposefully and not with any kind of intent. It was just, I need to make the purchase. The other one was more out of just didn't see the big picture, wasn't able to see the forest for the trees. They were in the trees.
So what I'm hearing from you is, we have an appropriate process and they have appropriate means to do what they need to do, so we really don't need an exception process to this.
Correct.
Because they have tools and they have more than one avenue available.
In an emergency, I can't think of, but I'm sure there's a case out there that would be, in fact, an emergency. They could get a hold of the principal, and as long as that principal got a hold of me soon after, we have a policy that says the superintendent shall not spend X number of dollars except in emergencies, clear emergencies. And I'll use myself, but it could be Dr. Hatchell, it could be anybody sitting behind the table over here. If somebody called one of us and said, look, I got a clear emergency here, and they were given approval to purchase, my view is as long as it came back to myself or the superintendent in an expedient, timely manner, not when the audit happens, but hey, last night or today or something very quickly, then we could probably work something out. Because they're aware. What that tells me is they were very clear on what they were doing and what the limits were, and they were asking for permission beforehand. The permission versus forgiveness kind of a thing, but they recognized it in a very timely manner, and weren't intending to do anything wrong or non-compliant. And by saying that, I'm not saying in either of these cases there was an intent to do anything wrong. It's expedient, and it's standing at the register, and it happened.
And regardless of that, if that occurs, this will gets to be one of the police does that.
I would say in the one case where I'd mentioned P-card for one person, one staff member, P-card privileges were suspended, moved. It was because it was the second occurrence at that school, not that person at that school. And that's the way it reads. To answer your question a little further, Ms. Van Meter, too, we're also, it's caused me to review more in-depthly what we call the P-card handbook, what the consequences and how things are handled on the back end, because it doesn't happen very often. So we're gonna sit down and have a thorough review of what that looks like now also.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Borland?
Well, I just wanted to make a comment that we need to recognize, and I'm not excuses, and I'm not saying I disagree with anything said. We have to recognize literally thousands of transactions occur. And when you have out of the thousands and thousands of transactions that occur, 2 instances, what I would regard as relatively minor violations of purchasing policy. Even though you're technically not compliance, I would have a hard time suggesting not compliance with the intent of this particular executive invitation. For the very simple reason, you recognized it, you took corrective action. And the 2 years out of 3 that we had 2 minor offenses, in each of one of those years, you took appropriate action. So that's really all I wanted to say. From my point of view, I see nothing with regard to these instances that would cause me to have concerns about propriety.
Well, just to add to that, the policy does say the superintendent will not allow splitting orders, and so it seems to me that did not allow this. As soon as he saw it happen, he took them into his office, and so I would agree with Mr. Borland that I don't think we're out of compliance with this policy. But I do appreciate Mr. Gregory and his staff for running a tight ship and managing our finances as well as they do, and I do accredit their management of our finances to our 60% passage of our bond. I think the people trust the finance department.
I respond to that, Ms. Bullock, just a combination of what was just said, that did change the interpretation. I know you probably didn't look at last year compared to this year, but along those same lines, when it says the superintendent shall not allow, we interpret that essentially it's not written in here as cannot happen. But we also changed the interpretation by adding a phrase, a clause in there between 2 commas. It now says the district will not allow splitting orders, comma, without consequence. That was not in there before. And it was kind of get at the same things you're talking about. Well, no, there was a consequence. Therefore, maybe it's not non-compliant. Maybe it's still compliant because it did not have the consequence component in there previously. It doesn't change what we're going to do internally to manage those, but it's a slight change to the interpretation. And then lastly, I'll say, to give some relativity to Mr. Borland's comments about the number of transactions. I'm not sure of the number, but I do know the amount. And last year in the 2015-16 fiscal year, e-card only eclipsed $10 million. So $40, there's a lot of $40 inside of $10 million.
Very good. Thank you, all of you, and Mr. Gregory. Shall we turn to the full and complete monitoring report evaluation for EL 2.4 financial condition and activities? So, is the superintendent's interpretation of the policy reasonable? Yes. Is there sufficient evidence to determine compliance for each section? Yes. Are all sections in compliance?
Okay, here's the conversation. Because as you pointed out, and I did actually notice, Mr. Gregory, the difference in the interpretation, the without consequence, I saw it. Which made me think back to some of our employment policies, are the ways that we handle things with people. In other words, we're never perfect. We have people in, through human resources and such, we always have some people who don't behave perhaps the way we like, or everything doesn't go perfectly in all of our human interactions. But so long as the superintendent holds them accountable for their behavior, we don't say that he's not in compliance. So it speaks to Mr. Borland's point that I would be willing to say that 2.4.7, while I appreciate Dr. Hatchell and Mr. Gregory reporting it as being out of compliance, I would suggest that we could say he is in compliance because there were consequences and the data was reported in here. So I guess I would leave it to my fellow board members to state what you think.
You're right, otherwise he'd be out of compliance for every misbehaves or every student who
Mr. Borland?
Let me just edit a sentence.
Sure.
And we had this conversation, a very similar conversation 2 years ago. Discussed that, and if you remember, we've looked at this policy before in various areas because some of the clauses without the permission of the Board of Education have been added because there are some things that are permissible with board approval, prior board approval, and there are some things that are never permissible.
So, from my point of view, were we to find in an audit that there were a number of incidents or a pattern of incidents, I'm talking about an external, a pattern of incidents where we failed to follow the appropriate regulations, and we allowed that to occur, that's when I would kind of say, I don't think you're in compliance. Because everything you do, you have to make corrections, and I just am a little bothered by a suggestion that not in compliance because you had people make a human error, or even an intentional error that we called them up short and corrected. And I'm not saying that to diminish the need to do that, because I think the strong controls are appropriate. I think they're forced the right way, and I wouldn't want to see that change. I guess it's just, I'm agreeing with your interpretation, the clause in your interpretation without consequence. Well, you didn't allow splitting without consequence. Therefore, I would argue.
That seems reasonable. It sounds like all three of you believe it's more accurate, in a larger sense, to say that Dr. Hatchell is in compliance in regard to that particular section. Yes, ma'am.
So here's my suggestion. I think we allow the report to stand because this is self-reporting. This was his interpretation, but I think in our report, the monitoring report evaluation, we say this in this section that we do disagree, but in a good way, that we believe that all sections are in compliance. But it's duly noted so that there's no confusion. In other words, if someone looks at it a year from now or a couple of years from now when we're all gone, no one remembers this conversation, we understand why. And I want that to be documented there, that the board agreed that despite Dr. Hatchell's honest, his honest reporting that this section is not perfect, that the board believes that he is still in compliance.
I'm good with that.
That seems very appropriate. Ms. Haddad, in answer to the question, the third question, are all sections in compliance? Please record that while the board recognizes the self-reporting of 2 violations to, what number is that?
2.4.7.
To 2.4.7, and appreciates being advised of that information. We believe that the larger
Can we use the term substantial compliance?
Yes, but there has been indeed substantial compliance with this EL 2.4, and within that, EL 2.4.7. All right. Very good. All right, continuing on. Recognition of exemplary performance.
Yeah.
Great job.
Very. Any concerns regarding performance?